With that said, I popped out for some listener questions. Guys, thanks for responding. Um, so I'm going to, I had the question, what is the biggest question mark going into training camp? Read some of these out and then, hey, give me my thoughts. One answer, defensive scheme. How difficult is it to install a new defensive scheme given the limited reps at limited reps? I can't even talk at OTAs. Good question. Okay. This is for me, this is where film and then experience and having mentors matters the most. Can you learn without taking reps? Absolutely. Like, how much better can you get if you have film to watch, watching it with somebody who understands what you're trying to accomplish? And that's usually a player who plays your position, or or it could be a player coach, it could be a coordinator, but like you don't have to be there. You don't have to be in that situation. There are plenty of guys that understand how to run cover three. There's plenty of guys who understand how to fill a B gap. Now, if you're talking about nuanced details, if you want to talk about how do you scout your opponent, if you want to talk about the technique you want to use, you're going to have to learn, like from a technical standpoint, what the expectations are for you, and you can rep that on your own. But really, you can never watch enough tape. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it. It's like no matter, even if you're at a just elongated period of OTAs, or they extended it so you could watch another hour of film a day, like you really can't watch enough. Like you just can't watch enough film, because when you start really watching film, you'll just, particularly depending on the position you're in, you're gonna start looking at different things. I might look at the guy across from me. Then I might look at the next level. What is the, for me, like what does the linebacker depth or split tell me about who's coming down from the safety position, what my guy might be doing, what kind of defense they're run. I can know what set they're in, but does that tip off that they're running a specific stunt that we've seen? Right. And then you move back. Okay, they're rolling coverage here. Where does that mean the pressure's coming from? All of that, you just start moving back and seeing layers and layers and layers. And it's probably even more so, think defensively, you're at the safety position or the corner position where you're off the ball, you're looking at the quarterback, you got eyes on. I think the more tape you watch and understand how quarterbacks try to bait you, what their pump fakes look like, what their footwear looks like when they're running, certain routes, all of that stuff, it starts to build out. I mean, you started by watching the receivers, you started by watching the splits, you started by watching the formations in the splits, the releases, their breaks, any tip tells and tendencies they have. Then you probably get to the quarterback, right? And then you start thinking about, okay, what does his footwork on this look? Does he ever throw a hitch fade on a 3-step when he looks to his right? Does he always fake to his left? Does he pump fake it with two hands? All that stuff, like you start picking it up, and you have a catalog of different quarterbacks you've been working against in different teams. So I guess the short answer is you can definitely do it, but you're always going to have to put in extra time. Question: with the new strength conditioning staff, will they change anything, or is staying healthy more hope than anything else? Like, in other words, is there any magic potion that these guys can do that haven't been done before? Well, I'll say this. The last staff, and I've talked about this, that like they're as good as it is as there is in the league, as far as trying to improve the development of players while maximizing recovery and maintaining health. About 10 years ago, I think, when they started bringing in sports science guys, performance guys, there was this huge like cash thrown at these guys, but they were giving information to the teams that the coaches didn't really value, because some of the information contextually wasn't valuable. And then some of the information ran counter to what they wanted to accomplish. Like, if I'm trying to make you a tougher player, I got to put you under difficult situations. Well, for a while, when the guys were like, "Oh, he's running hot," I think the coach is going, "Well, good. That's like crucible time. Like, how do you get better?" Or the quarterback needs to get 40 reps. If the left guard is wanting to be on the first team, he's getting 40 reps too. I don't care how tired he is. So because of all of these different things, and that is not the fault of anyone except for probably the management who brought everybody in too early and started throwing too much money at these guys, that platform became a vehicle to really help players maximize recovery. And so all these different recovery modalities and understanding, okay, you've done this today. How are we going to get you back ready for tomorrow? That probably became of primary importance. And I think that's partly the strength and conditioning staff, but that's really the whole performance staff in general now and how they work together. We're talking about nutrition, recovery, strength, everything, the AT, the PT. So sleep. So are these guys like Christian Watson, for example? I just read somewhere he went and got tested like University of Wisconsin or something, and they were like, oh yeah, his hamstrings are imbalanced, and so they're going to work on that. I'm like, guys, I know that's a great news, and maybe Christian Watson wasn't aware, or maybe like it's new news. He's excited about like the opportunity to be healthy, so he's talking about that. But I would be, I know the guys that were there before. I would be beyond shocked if they weren't aware that he had a hamstring imbalance and they weren't working on it. I would be, I'd go out and give my car to the guy down the street. Like that doesn't make it. There's absolutely no way that's true. Okay, so a lot of this stuff is just repackaged, repurposed. There's fresh enthusiasm, and certainly when you send somebody to a specialist and they get information, sometimes you get excited about the product. Christian Washington, look, man, you're potentially a great player, but you want to be healthy. So of course you're going to be excited about any information that leads to like, oh, this is how I'm going to get healthy. So I'm just basically saying, I'm sure these guys are doing stuff that's very similar to what the last group did. I think the biggest change is probably how the personality of the new staff probably fits how Matt LaFleur thinks about himself, thinks about his identity as it comes to like his team in the weight room. All of that maybe changes a little bit because that's probably the biggest, like personality is probably the biggest factor in who you're going to hire in that situation. Over under, Isaiah McDuffie starts 10.5 games. I think Cooper's probably going to be handed the job. Injuries, who knows, but 17 games, 10.5 would be a lot of starts for him. I hope he starts 14, 15. Similar question. What's the plan with linebacker with two players playing with very similar abilities? I assume you're talking about Quay and Cooper. Quay's I think Quay outweighs him by like, 10, 14 pounds. Cooper's much more, in my opinion, off the film. Again, pro's different. Cooper looks like a very instinctive player. I think he naturally gets downhill better than Quay. McDuffie is kind of a more compact guy. He plays with better leverage, but he's 227. Cooper's 230. Quay's 240. Or 230 or whatever, 238. None of these guys are what you would call Isaiah's the closest thing you have to a thumper. Okay, the other two guys aren't thumpers. So getting off the block is really when you start looking at like, how's this going to work? You watch BC tape. You watch what Cooper's good at. You watch what Tyron Hopper's good at. They want to play down, they want to play downhill, but they're not big enough, and they're not good enough technically for block destruction yet. That's going to be kind of the thing. Can we force running backs to go laterally so they can run away from the lineman? Because if they run downhill, I think they're going to have a hard time. Like if you run inside zone, mid zone, where these guys have to have a real confrontation, I think more often than not, like we don't like that situation. So you're going to have to be really good in the middle, Kenny Clark and company, Wyatt and company, at clogging up those gaps and forcing running backs to bounce and forcing them to go laterally, because then it allows your linebackers to chase down and use speed. Now, I think if you have McDuffie in there instinctively, he just does a better job of filling gaps early. Now, again, when you get linebackers staggered sometimes and one of them's ahead of the other, it's just like a line out in rugby. When you got different lines, sometimes there's gaps in that as well. So you have to have those players playing in the same mindset. And that's going to be a real challenge, I think, for the defensive staff. Something they can certainly do, but that's a coaching point I think they're going to be harping on throughout OTAs and training camp. For against the proposed move of OTAs, is there a group that benefits from the offseason work together, aside from maybe the quarterbacks and wide receivers? I would say this: everybody benefits from working together. But, it's like Tom Brady during COVID and before COVID, he would go out and he had his guys working together, and obviously Peyton Manning, and you heard about these old. I think Russell Wilson did this or does this. I think all the quarterbacks do this now, where they'll have. Certainly, there was something up in Minnesota for years where guys are getting their players together in a place that they all want to be, and they go and they talk and they hang out. Maybe they rent a house and they work and they work and they work. And it's away from the facility. So what's that mean? Well, that means that there's nobody in the room except for them that's going to tell them how they want something run. So that it's just like a one-to-one communication. And sometimes that's good, especially if you've got like a veteran quarterback and some younger players. And sometimes, maybe in the case of the Green Bay Packers, maybe you want that wide receivers coach there more because we have some fundamental problems with like route running because they're still young players. But if you've got kind of veteran guys or a veteran QB who can tell you exactly what he wants, then going off on your own, because now you're at the gym that you probably appreciate more than maybe you do being at the facility. You're keeping your own schedule. All of that stuff. If it's, they're not worried about like, can they afford their meals and stuff. They're, going to get a free meal from the Packers. Like, guys aren't worried about that. The people I'm referencing aren't worried about that, I should say. So there's some real benefit to that being away. So I think that 4 months, like I don't think that you're gonna sit here and watch the quarterbacks and wide receivers not see each other until the mid-June. Now, linemen, defensive line, like Mike Flanagan and I lived near each other. We'd have guys come in and work defensive ends, different offensive linemen down at UNLV in that area in Vegas. But, we didn't have like a summit like they have now. They have like an O-line summit, but a lot of that is not focused on, hey, technically we're going to make you like the best player. It's like, how do you take care of yourself? There's a lot of kind of introduction stuff going on there as well. I've been told. So I think all of those things are good. The tight end, I think all those things are good. And you're going to see that more if you have a longer off season compared to that ramp up. Secondary and kicking, what the number one concern? Secondary and kicking game for sure. Not only kicker, but the new rules in return game. Oh, so I think this. I'm really excited to see how Rich Bisaccia uses Keyshawn Nixon in the new kickoff return, but also I think Marshawn Lloyd. When I see Marshawn Lloyd and you start talking to like some special teams guys around the league about what are the options now with guys lined up on the 35 and the returners lined up on the 30, and then you got two guys in the back. And you got, because it's a little bit, they couldn't do the XFL one, so it's a little bit different with the way they can drop two guys behind the 30. Like, you could see some sparks fly, especially if you get two returners back there, and they might be more like Nixon's going to be back there, period. But you start looking at that second guy, like Marshawn Lloyd, just from an explosive standpoint, Andy's 220, because all of that confrontation could happen, depending on how good these kickers are, like dropping the ball at the 19 and having it bounce, you got to pick it up. Like, a lot of this stuff is going to be maybe more how a running back sees the field than like a return guy. It could be all in one wave with one kick out block or one lead up, or, it could be a line of people that looks more like a zone read than, having players at all these different levels, because there's not, 35 yards to navigate through different blockers if you're the kickoff coverage team. So I'm super interested to see that. Here we go. Where the defense. So one of the questions is the new defense, is that going to force kind of a slow start on the defensive side? Is the offense going to have to make up for it? Are they going to lose a couple games early because of that? And then, how does that look over the course of the season? Well, here's the thing. It's a great question. What are the potential pitfalls and benefits of bringing a guy in from college? And remember, of course, that Hafley was also working as a secondaries coach for Rob Salah, I think, when he was in San Francisco. So one of the real positives for me is college football runs fast. So if you don't have a communication method that goes fast, like one word to describe a coverage, I don't think you last. So I think the verbiage and everything is going to be implemented quickly. And the hope there is that you get really, really good at a couple things early in the season. Like the hope for Halfley is like, can you install everything and be really good at everything on week one, day one? Probably not. But can you install 60 to 65, 70% of your playbook at a like elite level where they're communicating on the same page? Like communication and being on the same page is because that breeds confidence in not only yourself, but your team. That's one of the most important things you can come up with. So that's kind of the hope there for me is, can you install and run 60 to 65% of your stuff at a high level? And then as they start to scout you in, week 3, 4, 5, you can start learning how to disguise different looks and coverages. You can start getting a little bit better at, or maybe you can, get some new plays in there as far as like, these are looks that I'm not going to show, or, I was running a Mike Sam here and now I'm going to run a Sam Strong safety, but I'm going to show the same look, or I'm maybe going to bring it off the weak side instead of the strong. So there's a couple of different things that we can do. And, from a defensive or offensive standpoint, there's two schools of thought. Can I show one structure where I can do like 10 different things out of so they don't never ever know what I'm going to use? Or should I show 10 different structures that I do one thing out of so they have to remember why I would be in that formation, alignment, etc. So if they can see it, they'll be like, oh, they're running this. If a defense lines up in a base 4-3 and all of a sudden the will cheats out and they always do one thing, that's easy to see, right? If he stays in the same spot and does 10 different things, that's hard for me to pick up. If they run a base 4-3, but they also run out of their base package, they run 27 different looks, and I got to remember every one of them. That's hard to pick up as well. So what's easier to learn? Well, probably the easiest thing to learn is let's start in less and teach ourselves to do more with less without tipping. And then, so, we'll kind of have to see how that works, but that's, the pitfalls are sometimes, obviously the complexity of a pro offense is greater than most things you're going to see in college. So again, I think that benefits to, have less installed and just be better at watching tape. So again, having a better understanding of what you're going to see, what the keys are from a defensive perspective, looking at the offensive line, the backfield, the receiver splits, etc., being really, really good at that and teaching that and taking pride in that, and then being the best at the basis of, block destruction and tackling, maybe more so than how much stuff can I put in a week one. And, I just get the feeling that Half is going to be really good at that. It seems like from his interviews, that's what he really values. Got a couple of others here. How can the new aggressive style pass rush attacking defense stop the run without over pursuing? Well, when you're playing attacking defenses, like, it's not like guys are just, you hear this thing like make the tackle on the way to the quarterback. You still got to make the tackle. You still have to be, there's an awareness factor. And Old Man Washburn used to teach, it was Chris Kurasik's head D-line coach when they were in Detroit. They were teaching Ndamukong Suh. So Suh would show us back in the day, you put your hand in the ground and your first step, your foot's got to replace your hand. And then depending on which way your toes pointed is based on what your first read is. So think about how fast that has to happen. So with good defensive line coaches, they are teaching some very, very subtle movements, toe position, to combat what they're seeing off the initial movement of the guard and the tackle, for example, the 3 technique. So when you start talking about this stuff, like it sometimes seems like, maybe because some guys probably are just firing off the ball and they're running a trap right past them. And that's going to happen with a really well executed scheme at times. But with a lot of this stuff, you have to remember it's so much about details. And these guys are really, really high level coaching and high level playing, that a good, well-coached group isn't going to just, pin their ears back and give up the draw and give up the trap and give up the insides. They're going to have a very, very good understanding that we can play aggressive. We're just trying to reset the line of scrimmage every time. Again, what we just talked about, make that running back go horizontal so the linebackers can get off those blocks and make tackles. Can the offensive line and quarterback continue the success they were having last half of the year, last season? If yes, I think I should relax. Okay, well, I think so. I mean, obviously, losing Bakhtiari permanently is a big deal. Not understanding who you're going to have at at least two of the positions, I think is a big deal. I don't know what we've seen in OTAs, but Zach Tom's going to play, Jenkins going to play. Myers just for right now probably looks like he's going to be the setter. So is the first round draft pick? Where's he going to play? Jordan is Walker going to be the starting left tackle or not? Are we going to give Sean Ryan the not like? You basically have right now without knowing the other guys. You have 6 players for 5 positions. Who's going to play out? Luckily, you could start 5 that you saw last year and had success with. Sean Ryan not being a starter, but you could start 5 guys who you saw last year and had success with. I would imagine the quarterback, he's not in year 2, guys. He's in year 5 now, I think. So this isn't going to be one of those deals where he has a sophomore slump, right? And now his receivers are going to have a year under their belt of understanding and communicating how they want routes run. Are they seeing the same thing Jordan's seeing? And they were good last year. So, I think that competition and who's going to be the alpha in that room? Because last year we went into the room thinking like, okay, is it Dotson or Dobbs or Watson? And it wasn't. It's a no. It's so many of those other guys in different moments. And so who's going to fight to be that go-to? Or who are the 2 guys that you're going to line up and say, I got to throw to these guys every time? Is that even a thing? Is it going to be receptions by committee? Like there's so many questions to answer in that room because they're so good. And I think that's exciting, but it's also it's going to propel those guys. There's going to be 4 guys that get remarkably better because otherwise they're not competing. O-line depth. Oh, here you go. What are realistic expectations for Lucas Van Ness in his second season, assuming he's relatively healthy? So this one's tough for me because even when he was drafted, you watch his college tape and you go, okay, there's some athleticism there. Certainly, there's a motor there. He's an Iowa product. I like all of that, but as far as what about him physically or from a technique or movement standpoint does he put fear into my heart as a person who has to block him from a pass rush standpoint or a run game standpoint? And I don't have a great answer. And so I think he's going to have to take a really big jump as far as he does a good job with attacking inside hand and stabbing. Now, how fast can I work off that? How fluid am I flipping my hips so I can maybe have some more moves that help me win closer to the hip and armpit of the tackle? Being in a 3-point stance is, if they allow him to be, is going to be better for him than being in a 2-point. We saw that in college. It's absolutely true. Better get off, better leverage, better power. So I think that is going to be a big deal. Having said that, he's not a starting caliber player on this defense, and so he's a rotational guy. So again, not his fault, but you did bring a first round high draft pick. You brought in a guy that's not going to be a starter in year 2. That's, barring injury to somebody else, I think that's difficult. Have we seen the best of Josh Myers? And if so, is he the starting center for Green Bay all next year? What a great question. What a great question. I think the short answer is I don't think we've seen the best of him. I think that he dipped when they got a new line coach. He was better last year. I think he's going to keep, you have to know these guys, and I don't know him. I mean, you have to sit down and go, like, I want to know what kind of guy you are. Are you the kind of guy who's just like, man, I want to be all pro and I'm going to do everything to be all pro? Or am I a guy who's like, I'm an Ohio State kid. I've had a good career so far. There's been some ups and downs, but I'm managing. Like the perspective is different. It could be this, you say the first thing, and it's like, okay, I want to invest in this guy. You say the second thing, and it's like, I've heard this story before. I just don't know who he is. I've never sat down and had that conversation with him. But if he's a guy that's desperate, I want to be an all pro. I want to be considered the top at my position. I'm willing to put the work in, not just lip service. Then yeah, I think I still think there's a really high ceiling on him. And honestly, quite frankly, we saw it. I did some film on him maybe a month ago. But he does have some good things. It's just his limitation is still with his initial footwork, and he hasn't fixed it in 3 years. Last one. I think it really comes down to whether so many 2023 surprises can continue success in 2024. Kind of a lot of young talent to avoid a sophomore slump. It's true. We just talked about that with the wide receivers. I don't think you have an issue there. I think you're injecting some new blood into the defense. I think you're going to get a starter at linebacker. You're going to get 2 new starters at safety. Stokes is coming off an injury. Wyatt's going to be into his 3rd year now, so you expect a big jump in production from him. Comes in shape, comes in maybe ready to play with great leverage from snap number 1. And you really got something there. I think Kenny's still in his prime. Certainly, Rashawn Gary is looking to, I would imagine, have a big year after coming off the injury last year and being, productive. But maybe, I'm sure he left some meat on the bone that he wants to get back. Preston continuing to be kind of a very, very reliable player. And then you have your Lucas Van Ness, you have your Edibari, you have these guys that are, potentially going to have, I always look at, quite frankly, you look at the defensive line position, you look at Carl Brooks, and you think, well, he was pretty good last year. What's an offseason going to do for a guy like that? Is he potentially an 8 to 10 sack guy in nickel situations? It's not out of the realm of possibility. The way he played last year, he's got a nose for the football. So really excited about, I think, a lot of these things. And there's so much to be, this is the fun part about the offseason. There's so much to be answered. And certainly these guys are taking a hard look at it right now. I really am interested to see how that NFLPA thing is addressed. I do think there's a benefit for both sides. I do think that the coaches will initially go, I want to work with them more. But when they look at it just from a preparation standpoint, being so far into the playbook by day 1 of training camp just seems fantastic because, I think I said this, if I didn't say this before, mini camps, you're installing. Day 1 of training camp, you're reinstalling. Now, it might be faster, but you're still wasting time as opposed to just diving right in. So think about how much more productive you are from a film session standpoint if you don't have to do that for the first week of practice. Just right there, it seems like it's worth the time. All right. Guys, first time we've never done no film, and I'm super uncomfortable with it, and I know everyone's going to hate me for it because I think a lot of people watch this because of the film. But I can either pull up some old tape and go down memory lane. I can pull up some other guys. If you have ideas, if you want me to break down something, let me know. It's just right now, it seems like I don't know. It just seems like watching tape right now is outside of the OT. I can't get excited about watching guys in pillow pads. Just can't do it. All right. Find me Mike168. Hey, thanks to Bet Online, of course, our sponsor. Find us on the Believe Network. Mike168 on X. Process to Perform channel on YouTube. Have a great weekend.